Welcome back to the Artistic Vision, the podcast for developing the arts, presented by Baylor Arts. This week we have a filmmaker, a priest, a artist, a teacher, Matthew Aughtry, who's down at Baylor. He's in Waco, and he's an adjunct professor there. He's a chaplain there, and he's the new director of the Anglican Episcopal House at Truett Seminary. And just a fascinating conversation. He's also working on his doctorate, Fuller, on theology and the arts. So just a great conversation and wealth of knowledge about filmmaking, but about films in general, how to watch a film, about C.S. Lewis, we have a fun conversation about the Narnia series upcoming with being made by Greta Gerwig, or remade, I should say. Yes.
Yeah, I loved what he said about what makes a good film. Kind of talks about 4 aspects that I think are transferable to all art forms, but it was rich, really, really deep, and I think will impact the way that I watch films. Good stuff.
Yeah, just a good practical help of give me some handholds on what I should be looking for. So if you like movies, you want to know how to watch them with more gusto.
Well, yeah, that's a good word. Gusto? I mean...
intelligence. It's a fun conversation. And enjoy. Welcome to the Artistic Vision, Matthew Aughtry.
Great to be here.
The first question we ask our guests is, what's your beginning or your background with beauty? Were you raised in a home that appreciated it? Did the church, if you were raised in the church, appreciate beauty? Kind of how'd you get your start?
Yeah, I mean, I come from, well, I'll just say this. I went to high school in a place that had tractor day, where the students would drive their tractors to school. But we had a theater program, and I was very involved in that. I think I had a teacher, my mother told me this story recently. I had a teacher who, I believe it was in 3rd grade, who said, hey, Matthew is not a problem child, but he needs a place to express himself. I'm going to give him this much time during the day to do that in these sort of creative ways, but you also need to put him into a theater program. And so from about that time until the end of high school, I was deeply involved in theater. I think I have these kind of dual callings, which is something I've spent a lot of time thinking about, talking about with others. The pastoral calling, and then this calling to be an artist, and in my case, a filmmaker. And I remember distinctly when I was 7 years old, both being told that I would become a pastor one day and also seeing Star Wars for the first time. And both just shaped my imagination. And again, around that time, I began getting involved in theater. I also grew up on a good bit of land. We had cows on it, and I wasn't in charge of the cows, thankfully. Don't ever ask me to milk or move them. But I did disappear into the woods quite a bit and go down to the creek. I think I had a character in my mind who's sort of like Indiana Jones, but cows instead of snakes were his great fear. So a lot of imagination growing up. And I do think that in the church, I grew up in this, Southern Baptist church that I don't think would have been able to articulate why beauty or aesthetics mattered. And yet, I'll never forget, I wish I could find it, I would buy it. I mean, I would pay a lot of money for this. There was this painting, I particularly remember it on Sunday night in the old church, and it was behind the pulpit. I think it could move if the baptism was happening back there, but it sort of covered that area up. And it was Jesus on Golgotha, and there was like a skull subtly etched into the hill, and it just is still this image that sort of haunts me. And so, I think even that, right? If somebody chose to put a painting there, certainly the hymns that we would sing, I definitely felt, when people told me you're going to be a pastor one day, I didn't feel this weight. I felt excitement around that. And I think as a filmmaker, and I've planted a church, and I've done, it's so much the same impulse to gather people around a story and to be excited to find how that story is going to manifest itself, incarnate itself in these different individuals. And so that's something that I think that is beautiful, right? These disparate pieces coming together. We have a baptismal bowl in the back of our church, All Saints Waco, and it's a kintsugi bowl. I know you've talked to Mako Fujimara on this podcast, and I think that's exactly what every baptismal bowl is, whether it is that or it's not. It's this brokenness, this disparateness coming together. Of course, us and each other, but ultimately us and God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Yeah, good. Yeah, how did you come into filmmaking? You touched on it a little bit, but what was that journey like?
Yeah, so I so much loved Star Wars. I spent way too much time thinking about Star Wars. And then I only transferred that thinking when the Lord of the Rings films came out. And then, of course, those films are so great, especially the first ones. Truly, I think, amazing. But the best thing about those films, I'll go ahead and say, is actually the behind-the-scenes footage. Hours and hours on these DVDs, so that all my impulses to think making a movie would be a great thing to do with your life were confirmed, and my imagination expanded by watching people come together and try to tell one story across, hundreds and even thousands of people. So that shaped my imagination. And then in my last year of high school, I was lucky enough to be in Greenville County in South Carolina. There's a school called the Fine Arts Center. And like a lot of schools have, places where students who are, going to make more money than I am and go learn to be welders. Half the day they're like, we're not going to college. We're going to learn to weld, do these things. We feel called to these vocations. We have these skills. There was a place there still is in Greenville, South Carolina, where students who are in that county can go for a half a day and learn different art forms. So can go deeper into theater, deeper into writing, deeper into music. They had a filmmaking half-day program. And that was really, I've studied film extensively since then, and in degrees and certificates, but really that year of spending half a day just deep diving into the history and then the process of filmmaking is where I would say that really became less of a dream, less of an out there, and more of a action.
Nice.
Greenville gets a couple points in my book for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great program.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And your kind of most recent film is about C.S. Lewis. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I did just finish a master's in film here at Baylor University where I work. It was sort of a long process, and it's a longer story to explain how I ended up finishing it. But I decided to finish it by making a film about Lewis. Lewis was also one of the earliest influencers for me in terms of imagination and the arts. I encountered him at the Southern Baptist Church that I went to. In fact, one of my jokes in how I became Anglican was that I was told these 4 things that don't necessarily fit together. Don't drink, don't smoke, don't trust Catholics, but here, read C.S. Lewis. And then you go, wait, he's only a Christian again because he was always drinking and smoking with a Catholic. And so I just remember encountering Lewis, and it was right around the same time that the Lord of the Rings films were coming out. So I'm finding, of course, that there's not only this guy who I'm learning about in Sunday school, but he's friends with the guy who wrote these stories that are so deeply impacting me. And there was, and it's the romanticism around the Inklings as well deserved. This sense that there's these people, they're in community, they're creating, they're encouraging one another, they're challenging one another. It's sort of what all artists want, I think, and maybe it wasn't in reality, just like all realities are more complicated. But it's the vision of what we want. I think it's what we want spiritually as well, right? We want to be in these communities of encouragement and challenge and growth and laughter and joy. So Lewis has always been with me, and I think for so long I always thought his artistic impulse is the kid stuff. And then when he really grows up into what he's doing, he does this very logical, directed apologetics. And one of the reasons I think everyone loves C.S. Lewis is that he does both. But we've actually flopped that. And he writes his fiction later, and especially Narnia, what he's most known for. There's this letter that I think is Carl Henry writes to him, asking him to write some more apologetic work for Christianity today. And he says, no, I've moved on to something else. And it's just equally important, maybe even more important. which is this restoration of imagination. So I decided to make a short film where I play Lewis, which I know right now with my full beard, it doesn't seem like I can, but I don't know if I have some Ulster Protestant Irish in me, but when I shave my beard, it's close enough. And I wanted to play him in a way, I called it Past Watchful Dragons. And that's what Lewis says about what he's trying to do in Narnia, is that there's all these ideas that we have of Jesus and the church, and they become these things that we know we ought to feel pious about, that we ought to have affection towards. And he says, what happens is I think that obligation freezes our feelings because we know we're supposed to feel a certain way, and something inhibits us, stops us. And so I wondered if through stories, casting the truth of Scripture in a different light, if I could steal past the watchful dragons that often keep us from feeling how we ought about Christ. And I thought that's the Lewis that I love, is this person who knows himself, who knows that he had frozen feelings for so long and took this risk. And I think the double meaning for me in Past Watchful Dragons, so I portray Lewis as if he's reading for the very first time to the Inklings. The Inklings were a group before they were a group, right? They were these people interested in gathering and critiquing and discussing the literature that they loved. And I think there's a sense of distance when we are in that mode. It's still an important mode to be critical, to be able to say this movie works, this one doesn't, or this poem needs something else. But when it's your own work, I think is such a risk. And I think Lewis had to move past Watchful Dragons in himself to risk creativity, to not just say, let's sit around and talk about what we love about Homer or what we love about these Norse tales. No, let me try. I'm going to write a sci-fi story. So Lewis has this great quote about moving past Watchful Dragons. That's what I decided to name the short. I decided to name this short Past Watchful Dragons. And I hope to do more of them. But basically, Lewis uses this phrase, Past Watchful Dragons. And what he says is that there's all these realities that we know we should feel something about. There's the church, there's Jesus, there's our fellow Christians. And something stops us, something inhibits us from feeling as we should about the stories of Scripture, about the realities of Christ and his church and God's kingdom and the Holy Spirit. And he wondered if it was actually the obligation to feel a certain way about these realities that stopped us from feeling that way. I mean, I get this all the time with my kids, right? If I'm like, you should feel respect right now. You should do this because this is for our family or something like that. It's just like, that's going to cause the greatest rebellion reaction possible. And so he wondered if it was because obligations, he said, freeze feelings. And his own feelings have been frozen around faith for so long in his life that he wondered if he cast these stories in a different light, if he used an imaginative lens, if he might be able to steal past, he says, these watchful dragons that keep us from feeling as we ought. And I think that's what he saw as the great work of Narnia. And I think you see it in his other fiction as well, is to help us to feel again as we ought by seeing something strangely, by being defamiliarized, to use a more literary term. And I think the other thing is he risks, that's like a risk. There's this sense of, in our age, cynicism is a protection. And I think probably for Lewis as well. And I think, for the Inklings, so I portray Lewis as if he's reading for the first time a story of his own to the Inklings, reading from Out of the Silent Planet, which came about because he made a bet with Tolkien that he said, I'm going to go write a space travel story. You write a time travel story. Tolkien never did, but it did sort of reignite Tolkien's work on the Legendarium. Tolkien was, he took a lot longer to work on things than Lewis did, which is one of the reasons that was one of their creative tensions, was Lewis things out and Tolkien's like taking forever. He's the niggler, as in his own story, Leaf by Niggle. But anyways, Lewis takes this risk of, here's these gathered group of academics and older men, everyone's in their 40s, and they love art, they love these Norse stories, they love mythology, and yet they kind of have the distance that a critic has. The distance to say, well, yes, this works and that doesn't, or, oh, that's a really beautiful passage in this. Maybe I'll translate a story, but Lewis says, let's take this group one step further. Let us create the tales that we wish we could read, because no one else is doing that at the moment. And that's this great creative risk that I think is also a kind of move past watchful dragons, a move past the things that inhibit us from risking, actually, I think, what is our fundamental human vocation, which is to be creative. And that manifests itself in all sorts of different ways. Everyone doesn't have to be a filmmaker, a painter, a writer, but the risk to move past the distance, the cynicism, something that keeps us sort of, maybe you use another metaphor, Teddy Roosevelt's, something that keeps us out of the arena, out of the ring, right? We become merely the people critiquing what's going on. And the goal, of course, I think of the artistic life, of the creative life, of the Christian life, is to get into the ring and to risk. That past watchful dragons, for me, has a double meaning there.
He said older men in their 40s.
That's for you.
Wow.
Well, I just mean, there are these people who could just stay solidified and whatever.
Wise.
At that point in their life, they don't have to risk being creative, right? These are not 20-year-olds who want to be artists. These are people who have careers and families, and they could just totally exist, survive. And Lewis says, let's do something else.
I love it.
That's great. This is kind of a pointed question, but Greta Gerwig's remaking the Narnia series. What do you think about that?
Do you see behind me? You got Lady Bird poster on the wall back there.
I don't see that, but yeah. Okay.
I would say Lady Bird gives me the most hope about Greta's project. I think that, she's a person very, she's close to faith. She might be like one of those, Paul might say of her, I see by your films you are very religious, that you are groping about in the dark. And so I'm hopeful. I'm very, the wonderful thing about any film adaptation, and, usually I'm always around bookish people who say the book's always better, and Jaws and The Godfather are better movies than they are books. But most of the time that's true. The wonderful thing is no one can ever take the books away from us. And so I'm interested to see what she does. I definitely, Lewis was not a great lover of the cinema. He had a lot of doubts about its powers. He also lives in a certain time and is of a certain generation. I think, I rewatched the 2005 Andrew Adamson version recently, and I think there's some things it does well. I definitely would love for someone to swing for the fences creatively. And I think Greta is someone who could do that. The scene in Barbie, regardless of what else you think about the film, the scene in Barbie that she sort of had to fight for about, where it's Barbie sitting with an old woman on a bench and Barbie, this vision of beauty proffered to the world that is also so much plasticity, so much fakeness. Barbie looking to this old woman and saying, you are beautiful. And the old woman saying, I know it. Is this sort of sacramental moment in the film. It's the best moment in the film. I think if Greta can do that, that's literally someone who doesn't walk by the wardrobe, right? That's literally Barbie not walking by the wardrobe and saying, no, there's something here. And if you go deeper, further up and further in, that's where actually true beauty lives. So if Greta can do that, and who knows if she can, but with Lewis's work, but I would hope that she feels the freedom, and maybe that the Holy Spirit moves within her or despite her in this process.
I love Greta Gerwig, so there's some that makes me nervous as a purist, but I'm really excited about her takes, whatever they are. I'm excited about her takes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, even the Lady Bird, spoilers for however many years it is on, I think her whole journey, especially her giving in at the very end when she gets to New York City, her giving into her basest impulses and sort of ending up having to literally vomit up all these things, regurgitate all this garbage that she's trying to make a name for herself when names are not taken, they're given, right? And the end, she walks into a church, she hears a choir, she walks out, she calls her mother. And, the hearts of of children turn to their parents, forgiveness being the sort of final note. I mean, that's Lewis all throughout. She has touched upon the realities that I hope that's what's drawn her to this project.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I don't want to give it, this whole podcast about Greta Gerwig, but I do think like there's moments of redemption, like even in Barbie, like I don't know why I think Christian critiques are typically boring, but like Barbie is like, for me, a very redemptive movie, right? Like it's not about like the bad patriarchy or a bad matriarchy. It's about the joining of the two to a common good in the world. It's about what gender am I, or like how do I know I'm a woman? And the ending scene is her going to a gynecologist. Like it's she's saying something there,
And the joy of being human, right? The joy of being human, I think, is always Lewis's fear, is that we will become something other than human or less than human. Abolition of man, hideous strength, or even you think of Eustace becoming a dragon, right? And it's like the reality is he's always kind of been dragonish, and the goal is to have the scales ripped off. And so that Barbie sees the real world, knows the pain it brings, but in the end says, I want to double down on this human thing. I think there's hope there. And if nothing else, it'll make for good debates around beer and pipes. And then hopefully those people who critique it can then go, you know what, I'm not just going to rest on critiquing. I'm going to move past the Watchful Dragons. I'm going to risk making something of my own. Maybe it starts as an answer. Lewis is starting as an answer to the H.G. Wells stories. He's starting as an answer to this dream that was had that we're going to go colonize these other planets because that's what we're best at. And he creates Out of the Silent Planet. Now, we read that in that context, but I also think Out of the Silent Planet works. Certainly, Paralandra stands on its own. And so to me, it's great to have strong opinions, as so many Christians seem to do more and more, maybe engaging a bit more in dialogue with film and popular culture. The next step is go make something else. Go make something of your own.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And maybe now's a good time to ask. We've talked about Greta Gerwig, but like, what are some other your favorite films that you think we should go watch?
Yeah. Well, my other poster, maybe easier to see, is my Tree of Life poster.
Mm-hmm.
So being a Texan Anglican Christian theology film guy, liking Terrence Malick, loving Terrence Malick is part of getting that card to be approved. I do love the Tree of Life. If you haven't seen it, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's a hard watch, but I think it's definitely trying to do what I think the best art does, which is to defamiliarize. I think what I love about movies is they're so, at this point in our world, they're so ubiquitous, but they can still do things that totally, now that they have such a set language, somebody like Terrence Malick can come in and use cinematography certainly, but mostly editing to defamiliarize the way we see the world. Because what you can do with film is you can take somebody's life growing up in Waco, Texas, which is where Tree of Life is set, and you can juxtapose that through editing with the creation of the world, with the eschaton, with the end of all things. And in a way, I think you can get at a Christian imagination of time, which is that this is all not, we feel it linearly, and yet God sees how all things are working together, how all shall be well. And when you see that edited together so quickly, you go, it's but a momentary and passing trouble, right? In a way that we don't always feel in our time boundness. So Tree of Life, I think, is the best film that gets at that awakening imagination. And the way it's shot, I do live in Waco, Texas. I have to watch it about once a year, because he makes Waco feel like this Edenic garden. And what I tell my students is, you need art because you can't see. You lose the ability to see the world. But when I watch Tree of Life and I exit out of that theater or my office watching on a big TV, or where I can be fully immersed in it, not where I'm just sort of letting it play in the background or watching it on my phone. And then I walk out and I see the same live oaks that Terrence Malick has filmed with a glorious wide angle lens and they move up. And I go, wow, the world is charged with the grandeur of God. It really is amazing. So about August or September every year, I need to rewatch The Tree of Life to remind myself I live in somebody's vision of Eden.
Even,
I did
even
mention
as a
earlier,
series.
I think my other film I would say rewatch is the 50th anniversary. Go rewatch Jaws. I mean, this is a film that we think of as just sort of a monster flick, but it is really about what it requires. It's St. George and the Dragon. It's Beowulf and Grendel. It's it's about a man who is afraid of the water, who's supposed to protect these people on this island from this monster. I mean, it literally starts with a man and a woman, and this is why maybe don't watch it with your kids. Though it's filmed in silhouette, it's kind of classy. They start off and she strips naked and jumps into the water, and it's like this ought to be a safe place. This ought to be Eden. This ought to be the place. But guess what? The serpent, it roams. And where's the man? He's unable to become fully stripped down. He's unable to get into the water. He's lying drunk on the beach while this woman, this is the first scene, is destroyed by the serpent. And there it is, right? There's our first parents. There's the beginning of the biblical narrative. And then watch what it takes to confront and destroy this dragon throughout the course. It's not scientific. It's not hurt, but it doesn't win. It's not sort of brutish masculinity represented by Quint. It's this humility. It's this man who decides he has to face his fear ultimately because he's the father and he's the chief of this island. And so he has to go out into the ocean and risk being swallowed by the dragon for the sake of everyone else. And so this is like the way, if you can get the biblical narrative into your head, and we're talking about Barbie and Jaws, we're not talking, Tree of Life's easy. It opens with a verse from Job. But I think every story that's being told is groping about in the darkness. I see by your films, you're very religious people.
So one of your kind of other roles is being an adjunct in the film department there at Baylor. When you're teaching students to watching film who are probably, I'd imagine, you could tell me differently, I'd imagine they're like, does this entertain me or not? How can amateur film watchers maybe take us to the next level of what should we be looking for when?
Yeah. I think, just getting a sense of story structure is always the best. So, I just said Jaws starts in Eden. There's the beauty of creation. Almost every film, there's some sense of either you get to see the beauty of creation or we start and the character's always looking at a photograph or something of their kids. There's some beauty of creation somewhere in every story, I think. And then there's the problem of sin that comes in, right? Maybe it's the dragon. One of the reasons Jaws is so good is because it's also the corrupt mayor and all the people. Sin has these many manifold forms. And so I always try to be look for what is evil in this story. Is it merely evil outside force that is just like the Terminator? It's Jaws. It's this thing that we gotta obliterate it. If it's that, you want to see it completely. What do we want to see happen to Thanos at the end or Voldemort? It's the same thing if you watch them back to back. They just dissipate into dust. We know they are completely gone. Jaws, spoiler, it blows him out of the water. Complete evil. There's also the evil of broken relationships, right? And that's what corruption is in Jaws. It's these things where actually, and sometimes what you learn is, oh, the shark is actually my dad. You don't learn that in Jaws, but you do learn it in Star Wars, right? You think the complete evil that you want to see blown out of the sky is Darth Vader. Only what you come to learn is actually it's an evil of a broken relationship. The last evil that you're looking for is a personal evil. And we might be more kind, maybe like our Eastern Orthodox brothers and sisters, and say, it's actually a wound, right? It's actually not that this person's malicious, it's that they need healing. So again, in Jaws, which is why it's one of the great films, it does all three. Because Chief Brody ought not to be afraid of the water. Mm-hmm. The sheriff on an island ought not to be afraid of the water. It's a personal weakness. So there's evil that comes in. The third thing that happens is there needs to be a moment of sacrifice. And it's basically the character saying, usually the hero saying, okay, someone has to die here. Maybe not literally, but someone has to die. And the hero says, it'll be me. And the anti-hero says, anyone except me. And so in the middle of Jaws, he's going to go out on the water. In the middle of The Godfather, Michael Corleone is going to take revenge. And so literally you'll see these moments where people either choose to sacrifice. You can put this in a different place. It doesn't have to be the middle. And then out of that, what you're going to have is some kind of redemption. You're going to have some sort of, actually it was good that this happened. Tolkien called this the eucatastrophe. Without this happening, this great good would not have come into the world. And then at the end, you have a new creation. And maybe you just have a hint of it, right? Lady Bird. You don't see her and her mother, reunited, but she's talking to her mother, and you have the sense, man, one day they're going to be back in the same room, and that relationship will be restored. Jaws ends with the two characters who've survived, swimming through the ocean. They've got miles and miles to go till they get to shore, and they're laughing, right? Chief Brody, afraid of the water. Now the ocean, this place that at the beginning was this place that couldn't be trusted as an Edenic paradise. Here at the end, this man who had feared it from the beginning is laughing with joy. He's got a friend. It's literally the end of Casablanca. It's the beginning of beautiful friendship. These two men going off, and they're laughing and they're talking and they're joyful about what lies ahead of them. There's nothing to fear anymore in the ocean, which of course is like the great biblical narrative that there even is no ocean anymore. No chaos monsters can come out of this. It's just a river. You're good to go. Who knows where that river goes, but it goes right by God's city. And I think if you just have that sense of those sort of creation, sin, sacrifice, redemption, new creation, and you're always sort of saying, let's just look for one. Let's just look for one as we watch this movie. And how does that defamiliarize? Again, sort of Lewis's vision. How does that give me a different understanding of, in some ways, Jesus has got his rifle aimed at the oxygen tank in the devil's mouth. And when he pulls that trigger and it goes, or Iron Man snaps that finger, and all that was evil is washed away, and it has no history, it has no reality that bears on the present. That's like the deepest desire of our hearts, the deepest thing we want. And I always show my students these films, these big budget movies. I show them a few, Spider-Man 3, Avengers Endgame, Titanic. Well, I'm like, why do all the billion-dollar movies end with a man and a woman dancing? Go rewatch all of them. Because one day, the heavenly city will descend like a bride adorned for her husband. Heaven and earth will be made one. Why do these stories resonate? Because they're true, right? Always looking for that boy. I love a movie series that end with dancing. I'll show them, Toy Story 3, Guardians of the Galaxy 3, where there's just this sense of shalom and peace and new creation. I think the stories that matter to us the most, they always have these kinds of moments.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so this is a little bit unrelated, but related to us, and we'd love to hear kind of what you're up to over at Baylor. You just started a Anglican Episcopal house at Truett Seminary, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about how that came about and what you're up to.
Yeah, well, thank you guys. Yeah, it's related and unrelated. I think certainly, again, Lewis was a way I ended up moving further up and further into the Anglican tradition. I'm an Anglican priest. I think also seeing a tradition that has stewarded this story well, not perfectly, certainly not with finality, in a way where we would say, lock every liturgy and everything's done now and no other expressions needed, but with a certain sense of wholeness, and to see the liturgy, to live in the liturgical calendar, to live through each Sunday, the beauty of creation, the merciful creating God, to encounter the problem of sin, to recognize the reality of sacrifice, to pray for the redemption of the world, and to taste from the table of new creation. So they're related and unrelated, right? My pastor filmmaker life has just, I think, the boundary lines have fallen for me in a wonderful place within the Anglican tradition. And so what's happened here at Truett Seminary, Truett's a historically Baptist seminary, which is great because I am also historically Baptist, as I've explained, is we've just had, through the founding of the Wesley House in 2020, we've had Anglicans who have come in through a door we didn't expect them to come in through. They've snuck in through the wardrobe door of the Wesley house. And suddenly we find ourselves with these young men and women who are wanting to be formed and who are wanting to find ways to move further up and further in and into their calling. And so I've been asked, well, I'll explain just briefly why I'm even in the seminary conversation is because we've been doing, for years my job has been, and I'll still have a hand in this, offering chapels for our students who are studying in the arts here at Baylor University, who are studying in these creative fields, inviting them to move past the watchful dragons and to trust that actually, whatever impulse they have to creating, that's God. That's God calling them to live into the fullness of who they are. And so I began conversations with Dean Todd Still of the seminary and others about creating a program focused on theology and art, because I can't teach all. We have so many students and faculty and staff engaged in the arts that I want there to be just as many seminarians who are interested in this conversation of theology and art who can engage with them. So that's how I started talking to the dean, and we're really close on that program being finalized. It looks like it'll be an emphasis within our existing degrees, though there might also be some sort of certificate others can do. More to be said on that in the future. But as I was in the building, the one person wearing a clerical collar, I'm not today, it's summer here, so no one's around, but the one person with a clerical collar in the building, an Anglican who planted a church, the dean just asked me, would you be willing to serve in this capacity as we launch this house? And it was a surprise, which I think is usually how God is at work in something and not you. I have all my own plans and schemes and dreams, and then he basically came and said, you've already been doing this work, helping people find placement, helping people get ordained. This is the work of the house. So we are still in early stages. We will have Rowan Williams here October 28th and 29th. That's a free endowed lecture, free to you, paid for by someone else, which we Christians understand about. and Rowan will be here talking about Nicaea. That'll be more of the hard launch. And then over the next year, what I'm really working on is figuring out what our life together looks like. And so we want, and we already have students in both the ACNA and in the Episcopal Church USA, particularly the Diocese of Dallas. And we want students who feel called to live into the fullness of what we would call Truett's gift to the world. We're a little E, evangelical, little O, orthodox seminary embedded within a Christian R1 university, the biggest Christian Research One university in the world. And so the great thing about like the arts programs, and I hope with the Anglican program as well, is that also means students are going to take classes at the seminary, but they can go, my friend who teaches in religion and film in the film department, Zach Sheldon, hey, just go take religion and film. I don't have to teach that here. Also, I hope with the Anglican house, part of the beauty of Anglicanism, it's this place that's tried to hold together a breadth. Sometimes it's weakness, but it can also be one of its great strengths, is to say, actually, architecture matters a lot. Actually, I'm going to go take a whole class on these, George Herbert and all these poets being taught in this great text program, and that's going to help inform how I'm going to be a better Anglican minister. And I think that's why sometimes I'm like, I don't have the bona fides. I don't have all the the right credentials to lead this Anglican house. I think in some ways, and to be clear, I'm leading it with a variety of others, and I think others will be hired and brought on. But I think what I've learned in leaning into what it means to be an Anglican priest is I do have these friends throughout history who've tried to hold together this tension, being poets and priests, right? Being makers and artists and pastors, and finding within them, as I believe, I know you two have, and as so many of you have had conversations with on this podcast have, that the art of making and the art of living are a conversation about the same things.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Our time is up, unfortunately, but we give you the last word always. What's something you'd want to share with Christian artists?
Dear Christian artists, do not remain stuck in cynicism. Do not try to keep yourself safe. Move past the watchful dragons which dog our world at every corner, so that you can invite others to do the same.
There you have it. That's good.
A good Louisian, I don't know if that's how you say it. That's right. Louisian word of wisdom.
Okay.
So good. Thanks, Matthew.